Yo, hello and welcome back to another little video for the game Super Autopads. You heard me preaching that the horse is bad all the time, I think. In this video I want to try to back up this claim. I think that the horse is extremely bad and actually tricks a new player into playing it. It's actually quite an ingenious design in my eyes. I think this is because the horse seems to be kinda nice together with the cricket, but you will learn that this combination of units to play in the beginning is not a good idea. Now, to elaborate, we obviously need to create some form of comparable value for each tier 1 unit in the game. I will exactly do that and will then compare this value to the value of the horse. We can achieve this by looking at the raw stats and the stats of a buff of an effect a unit provides. So the first question to ask here is, what is the expected stat line of a tier 1 unit? We have to simplify the effects of some units a bit, unfortunately. Let's look at Ant first. The Ant is a 2-1 and on Feint it buffs another unit for +2/+1. To explain the sheet real quick, here you have its raw stats and here are its stats by its effect. Both are 2-1 on that Ant. This one is a place where we can set up a multiplier for the buff an animal provides. This will actually come in handy later, but is not really relevant for the Ant right now. And here we have those stats summarized for this unit. So overall attack on this unit is 4 and overall HP is 2. In fight, you could argue that the Ant is worth 6 stats. Keep always in mind that the buff by the Ant is only temporary for the fight, but whenever you are playing Ant, that buff will occur every fight, so the fact that this effect is temporary in fight won't change its value whatsoever. It would be the same if the Ant would buff one random dude by +2/+1 once permanently. Obviously, it would only be the same if you only look at the stats and only as long as you're keeping the Ant on your lineup. You're with me? We have to simplify it in this way, unfortunately, to be able to properly compare the units. Okay, this was fairly easy, but if we now look at Fish, things get a bit convoluted, as there is no clean way to actually show this. The Fish is a 2-3. The effect of it reads, whenever this fish levels up, each friend gains +1 attack and +1 health. So the Fish is definitely worth more than a 2-3. But by how much is it actually? You can argue in the first rounds the Fish in fight is a 2-3 because that effect most likely won't occur that early. Maybe in turn 3. If you're able to level up the Fish, you're most likely buffing like 3 or 4 units depending on the fact where you had your third Fish, either already in your lineup, which I think is the most likely occurrence, or actually in the shop. Let's just say your Fish can buff 3 units with its effect, just to keep it simple. You've put 3 fishes into each other to level it up. You are buffing for +3/+3, so each fish buffed for +1/+1. This buff is permanent, but won't occur as early as the buff by the Ant, so a fish's true power level is starting at 5 and is most likely capping off at 7 here. The Ant's pure power level is a 6, so in a sense these are actually similarly strong. Only that the Fish has a bit more value later on, so that's by the way why you can call the Fish a slow unit and the Ant a tempo unit. Let's now quickly skim over all other tier 1 units in the same way. Beaver is a 2-2 and will buff on sale for +0/+2, 6 stats overall. Beetle is hard to evaluate. I actually ignored its effect, cause I for myself tend to actually never really trigger it. In my lineups that Beetle is in 99% of the cases just a 2-3. The Bluebird is a 2-1 and buffs for 1 attack. This unit is where my way of showing this kinda falls apart, as the longer you keep the Bluebird, the more it actually will provide stats. So its real value changes over time. First round it will obviously only provide 1 attack, but second round that first attack it provided is still on the board, as this buff is permanent. But it will provide another attack. If we say we are looking into this until the third round only, the Bluebird will apply its buff 3 times, which is generous I might add, as I don't tend to keep it for 3 whole rounds. But if I do, in the first round it will provide 1 attack as I said, in the second it will provide 2, and in the third it buff for 3 attack, the average of that is 2. So that's a multiplier of 2 for the buff it provides. That ends up being worth like 5 stats overall. Okay, next up is the Cricket, which is actually a 2-3, as it's a 1-2 and the small cricket it spawns is a 1-1. The fact that the horse might buff that small little cricket is ignored here, cause that value by itself comes from the horse, so we will have a look at that in a second. Next is the Duck, which is a difficult one. It's a 1-2 and on sale it will buff all units in the shop for +1/+1. If you actually will sell it, how many units are you going to buy from that shop? That's the main question here. As you can pick and choose the moment of time where you sell the duck, you're going to do it most likely with more than just one unit in the shop. So that's a multiplier of 2 for me on average. But okay, yeah, honestly that number will probably more in the 1.8 or 1.7 range though. Let's do 1.8, so you're maybe averaging on 6.6 overall stat line for one duck. We talked about fish already, but I should probably add the fact that you're not always going to level up the fish. How often is a fish you bought going to end up in a level 2 fish? That's honestly really hard to guess. If we would say it's half of the time, which seems pretty harsh to me, we end up with a multiplier of 0.5, so an overall stat line of 6? Yeah, probably 6. That ladybug is a 1-3 and will buff itself for +1/+1 whenever you buy food. With a ladybug on the field, I tend to use this effect quite often. Well, I try to use it every round actually. If I would actually manage to do so, that ladybug would end up being a 6 stat dude, but to be fair, I don't manage it every time, so I thought a multiplier of 0.7 made sense. 5.4 stat line on this one. Mosquito is a 2-2 and will shoot 1 damage towards an opponent. So for simplicity, I added 1 HP to the Mosquito as it reduces 1 HP from the opponent. Obviously that's not the same and it's very likely to be worth more than that. That's why it has a multiplier of 1.5. This also doesn't seem to be too accurate, but we will leave it at that because it's not about the Mosquito here. So the Otter is a 1-2 and will buff for +1/+1. 5 stats. This actually doesn't tell the whole story of it, but we will also leave it at that. Pig is a 2-2, which has a completely different effect, arguably not measurable right now. We could do the math at some point how much stats 1 gold exactly is worth, and I would suggest something like 1.5 stats or maybe even 2, but that's something for another time. Ooh, okay, now these are all tier 1 units in the game, ignoring my beloved Sloth and obviously ignoring the Horse so far. Taking all stats of all tier 1 units into account and getting the averages of it, we are at 2.45 attack per unit and almost 3 HP per unit. So you'd expect a tier 1 unit to be around like 2 or 3 attack and having 3 HP, taking into account all effects too. Now, fucking finally, let's talk about Horse. The Horse is a 1-1 and will buff a unit whenever it shows up for 1 attack. Temporary. That effect is always temporary no matter where it happens, either during the shop phase or during combat. Remember that we talked about Bluebird? That one is a 2-1 by itself, and if you keep it until turn 3, it will have an expected value of 4-1 per round. And keep in mind that on average you'd expect a tier 1 unit to have overall stats of 5.4, so the Bluebird is worse than average here. Without the effect of the Horse is obviously only a 1-1, so a 2. So in order to be at least average, the Horse has to buff more than 3 times per round. If it manages to buff 3 times per round, it's as good as a Bluebird. Let's see in which scenarios we achieve this. First round, ideally we would buy Horse first. We then pick up a Cricket, and an Ant for example. That Horse will buff the Cricket in the shop phase and the Ant in the shop phase as well. In fight, the Cricket will spawn the smaller one, which will receive a buff by the Horse too. Okay, so we managed to buff 3 times. Whew. Second round, all buffs wore off. Again, we need to at least buff 3 times. We buy 2 more units to fill up the board. If we manage to pick up a second Cricket, we're happy if we're not combining it with the first Cricket we have. Again, 2 buff triggers on both units we bought. In fight, both of our Crickets will spawn the smaller one, so the Horse will again be triggered 2 more times. Equals 4 buffs actually. Wow, we're absolutely peaking here. Round 3, your board is full already and the buffs wore off again. I think on average you pick up 1 or 2 new units, maybe getting your Cricket to level 2, which you most likely not wanting to do the more I think about it. So again, you're at like 3 or 4 buff triggers, maybe rather 3 than 4 in this round. So, as you can see, the Horse barely is average as long as you buy 2 new units per round. Which is realistic in the first rounds maybe, but from round 3 onwards you're most likely not going to do that every round. The Horse needs to provide 4 buffs to have overall stats of 6, which we already know is quite good, but 4 buff targets per round is really difficult to achieve for it. Think about it. Also, only Crickets actually provide a basis where the Horse does find additional targets outside of units bought from the shop phase. Only talking about the first 3 rounds here. If we now take an average of 3.5 triggers per round by the Horse, we are getting overall stats of 5.5, but that means we're playing Cricket. At least 1, but most likely 2. Okay, so 2 crickets with overall stats of 5 plus 1 horse with overall stats of 5.5 is on average 5.17 stats per unit. This is below average. If you only play 1 cricket, you're getting 5.25 stats on average per unit with that strong horse from earlier. Honestly, in that case, the horse probably won't have a multiplier of 3.5 but less, but I'm feeling generous today. Well, 5.25 is still below average. Now with these numbers, 5.17 or 5.25, so like 5.2, which is easier to work with, you have to keep a few things in mind. First, we painted a whole world where you actually have cricket in the shop and you can buy a horse first. This world is absolutely ideal for the horse. On average, you won't be able to do that more often than not, so the true multiplier of the horse is probably even lower than ours. Secondly, we totally ignored that the horse will buff attack only and will always provide only 1 HP to the game. Let me ask you this, would you prefer a 49-1 unit, a 149 unit, or a 25-25 unit? All of these have the same overall stats. You would always go for a 25-25, right? Having a unit skewed to one side extremely diminishes its value even more, which it didn't take into account at all. Also positioning. In order for the horse to provide its buffs in fight for crickets and maybe spiders later too, that horse needs to sit in the far back usually. This also comes with a price. Not a huge one, but not being flexible in your positioning can hurt you in some ways sometimes. So, all in all, buying horse makes you extremely unflexible in your shop picks because you have to prioritize the less than average cricket to actually getting close to average for the horse itself. Which, by the way, also diminishes its value because you simply cannot pick up a certain unit which might be better for you in the long run. Horse is a commitment for your board, and if you commit 100%, you are lucky actually going to be average. Okay, to close it off, what I actually want to say, and what could be a nice closing statement here too, is please play horse so I can feed off of you little shits. See you next time and enjoy my end card. As always, if you like this video, never tell me or your friends, and also please never share this around. Also, please make sure to not like this video. If you want to see more content like this, definitely don't subscribe to my channel and never check out this video displayed over here. See you in the next video. I'm out.